Welcome to episode 11 of the Filmumentaries podcast. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Sylvain in episode 10. This episode, I was very fortunate to speak to the guy for behind the scenes movie books, J.W. Rinsler. I've been a big fan of Jonathan's work for many years, particularly his Star Wars trilogy books, The Complete Making of Indiana Jones, and his more recent Alien and Aliens books. Jonathan and I were hoping to talk a few weeks back, but unfortunately he had to pull out of the interview on the actual day. Fortunately, he contacted me just this week to say that he'd very much like to go ahead with the interview. I should inform you that Jonathan is not 100% at the moment. He's unfortunately dealing with the effects of chemotherapy, and before the interview he warned me that he had pretty major brain fog. However, he was still very keen to chat, and I had the pleasure of speaking to him for 45 minutes about his amazing books. So, Jonathan, you're very gifted at digging through historical material and creating compelling stories. Do you have any qualifications in research or history?
Well, qualifications in digging? Not really. I mean, I did my master's in comparative literature at New York University. So there were a few research papers, but nothing on the order of what these books require. No, it was really just one of those weird Lucasfilm sort of mom and pop things where they said, we think you can do this. Good luck with it. And if you don't do it, you're fired.
And how did that first connection to Lucasfilm come about? Was it a job that you applied for, or were you approached?
No, I applied for it. It was just I wanted to work at Lucasfilm, and the jobs at that time, it was just 2001, were just listed online. It was very simple. There were no search engines to go through. It was just Lucasfilm, here are jobs. So I just applied for it, and it wasn't making of books. It was to be an editor there, and there was a small publishing department with about 3 or 4 editors. So I just applied for it, and then it turned out to be to involve overseeing these making of books, and so then one thing led to another.
And now here you are with a huge catalogue of what are regarded as the definitive making of books.
Right, which was never anybody's intention at all. I was just hired to be the nonfiction editor. So it wasn't like I was just supposed to do this thing, and nobody had any plan.
Was the initial idea to do the books your idea, or was it Lucasfilm themselves had a plan to make them, and then the timing happened to be right, and you were the right person for the job?
That was my idea, because but I had just done the episode 3 book. I mean, literally, I think it wasn't even back yet, but George had read it and he had liked it. So I think I pitched it, and it turned out, and I wasn't even aware of this. This is how unplanned it was. It turned out that the 30th anniversary was coming up. So then the publisher said, "Oh, okay, well, we could do that for the 30th anniversary," and then and George approved it. So then that's how the first one happened, and then the second one followed because the first one made money.
And was that a daunting prospect then, because it's a film that already there was plenty of information out there in the public domain about it, and here you are setting out to make the definitive behind-the-scenes story. Was that a daunting prospect, or was that one that you relished?
I think it was more on the daunting side. That's why I decided to stick very closely to those Charles Lippincott interviews. I thought I knew that I'm not a Star Wars, wasn't and still am not a Star Wars expert. I write these books and I try and tell the story as well as I can, but I'm not an alien expert. I'm not Planet of the Apes expert. I just try and get all the information and do the best job I can. And so I just thought that's what I'll do for the Lippincott interviews and, bring in a few things from the outside as necessary, not be too rigid or anything. And then as time for the next books, as I got more confident, I was able to sort of do more interviews and do more things. If I had to go back and do the making of Star Wars again, or if we did a revised version, so much or a fair amount of information has come to light. So you could add probably a couple of chapters.
Mm. Yeah, you did go back in a way, I guess, with the ebook version. What was the inspiration there? Was it because there was just so much video material that you'd found, and audio material that you thought could enhance what was already there?
I think I was probably talking about it because I would be in the film archives, but I'd never really explored the film archives. But I believe it was the publisher who said, all right, well, let's do it. They were the ones, I think, who said, all right, let's go ahead and do this thing, because it involved some budget. And we did it. We didn't have, well, we had the right amount of time. It was a good amount of time. That was a lot of fun.
What kind of state is that archive in, or was it in when you were there? I mean, is it easy to find things? Is it well catalogued?
Let's say they had done the best they could with the means they had. Even though it's a big company, a big mid-sized company, or it was at the time.
Yeah.
They hadn't spent a lot of time organizing it, and some things were probably there that nobody could find. So in a way, it made it more fun because we were treasure hunting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wouldn't say, you couldn't just say, all right, well, I need the dailies from Return of the Jedi, this scene. Which shelf are they on? No, you couldn't do any of that. But they were there all the days.
When you were doing that first one, the making of Star Wars, were you kind of aware that if you came across some Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi material, did you kind of make a note of that because you thought maybe I might have to do ones on the sequel at that point, or were you very much focused on the first film?
Well, the archives are organized pretty well as per film. You occasionally find stuff that's in the wrong file, but but not too much. No, not that often. No.
And when you make these books, like as you said, you've made them on Alien and Aliens and Planet of the Apes. Do you think having a personal connection to those movies is a help or a hindrance?
I think basically it's a help. I mean, you don't want to let it cloud your judgment in some way, just because you might not like a scene or a character or something, or have some pet peeve about the movie.
Yeah,
doesn't mean it really has to go into the book. Unless there were a lot of other people, whoever fans or people working on the film who had similar feelings. So no, I don't think I think it helps, and it helps to bring some sort of warmth to the subject. You want people to have fun when they're reading the book. That's your primary goal.
Yeah. You've ended up sort of by default somehow being a sort of custodian of these films' behind the scenes stories because of making these books. I myself have made some behind the scenes stuff, and I think, as you said before, you go into these projects and you find out stuff that's brand new to you. You don't necessarily retain it. Do fans still kind of expect you to be this all-knowing entity that has the answers for everything?
I don't know. I think I've done a pretty good job over the years of saying that, if you want to know what alien that is back there in the third row, I'm not the person to ask.
Yeah.
I have no idea what guns they're holding. I don't know what planet they're on, except for the large strokes.
Yeah.
I did eat, drink, and write Star Wars for 15 years. So some of it definitely sticks in your mind forevermore. But yeah, otherwise, I'm not that person.
Yeah. Were you ever tempted to make a video making of at all, given the access that you had there and the material? A lot of this stuff was brand new material to a lot of fans like myself who trawled through everything that had been publicly available up to that point.
Right. I was very excited about what we found in the archives, and I wanted to make a making of Star Wars behind the scenes video. I was pushing for that for many years and made some headway. And it may have actually happened, except that George, at the key moment, George sold the company. That was when he sold the company.
Mm.
But there is definitely material back there to make a really great making of documentary, and I'm sure because there's money to be made,
Yeah.
and there's material. I'm sure somebody will do it eventually.
Yeah, I did hear that the making of that was on the latest Star Wars films Blu-ray release, the documentarian, she had 350 hours of behind the scenes material from the original trilogy to trawl through.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty tantalizing figure that there's clearly, as you say, enough material there to make something. Um, have you ever come across a situation in making these books where you've had to kind of bury some information? I'm not expecting examples here, but has there been any sort of political edge to any of these that you've done? Because obviously each filmmaker wants to control their own story.
Right. Not really political. I mean, there's political stuff as you know in the books.
Mm.
So whenever I came across it, I didn't shy away from it. I just put it in there and tried to be as judicious as possible, and then let George decide. And he actually never took anything out.
Mm.
And in fact, there were a couple issues where I wasn't going to ask him about it at all because I figured, I better not go there.
Really?
And but then during the interview, he would go there. So he would flesh out a couple things on Empire and Jedi. There were a couple of personal things that I found that didn't go into the books because it didn't have anything to do with the making of the films.
Yeah, sure.
So I find that to be outside the scope. And it's not that kind of book. It's not really that kind of looking for gossip thing.
Yeah, not digging dirt or anything. I was fortunate enough to speak to Gary Kurtz a couple of times a few years back. And one of the questions I asked him, it was an open kind of audience Q&A. I asked him about Marcia Lucas's involvement in the film. And he kind of lit up suddenly and spoke really enthusiastically about her. Now, her story has been kind of sidelined a little in the lore of Star Wars, but you rightly so mention her in your book. Was there a reluctance to talk about or to write about Marcia on George's part, do you think?
Well, again, that's where it's his private life.
Sure. Yeah.
But the divorce is something that I thought he wasn't going to want to talk about, and he did. That was a subject that he actually did. He went into more detail than I thought he would for the Jedi book. But I knew it was a painful area, so I just generally avoided it.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that Marcia was important, and I tried to get her into the book as much as possible. Not that George was saying, "No, don't get her into the book," but I just knew it was a sensitive area.
Yeah.
And so when I was doing this book, I don't know if you've heard of this Howard Kazanjian book that I'm doing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about it. I actually spoke to Howard via email a few weeks ago. He's going to come on next year and do an interview as well. So
hopefully
looking forward to that. Yeah.
Time to promote the book. So thanks to the friendship between Howard Kazanjian and Marcia Lucas, we were able to, or he arranged for me to talk with Marcia one afternoon in San Francisco, and it was great. It was like being able to talk to the one person, sort of the one sort of key person who I had questions that I'd sort of been saving up for a decade. So it was, and she was very open and helpful, and also, but not at all. There was no sort of settling of scores or anything. She was very complimentary of pretty much everybody, and of course a lot of George.
And then you finished your job at Lucasfilm around, and that would have been the time that Lucasfilm was sold to Disney. Is that correct?
No? George sold the company in something like, because they announced it and it wasn't actually sold till later. So it was 2012, 2013, and I stayed on until the end of 2015. So I was there for the whole gestation of The Force Awakens, up till the release of that movie. And I wrote that book, which was canceled.
Yeah.
About the movie.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think you said, what you know and what you can about
Yeah,
why it was cancelled and so on. It's a shame because it really felt like, it would have opened up that film and given people an insight into the creative process, because that's what your books do. They give us that window into that
maybe.
world. Um, my my young daughter has just discovered the Sounds of Star Wars book, which you also released, which she loves, because just hearing those things in isolation really helps you understand the creative process. Was that something that followed on from having made those trilogy books, where you thought that material is there, we should do that? How did that come about?
No, that one again. That one was one that a publisher, was Chronicle, thought might be a good idea,
Hmm.
and so I did some preliminary research and found that we had these. Not only did we have the sounds, sort of the raw sounds, but we had sort of these production files that were very interesting and long, and sometimes had things that were not in the movies. So then, then we decided to do that
Hmm.
book. But I think we should have. I think we should have done it as a more high end thing with a higher, with a fancier looking sound module.
Hmm.
But you can't win them all.
Well, I've had my copy of it since it was released, and it's still going strong, I have
That's
to say.
amazing.
And we're still getting enjoyment for it. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
Obviously, with Lucasfilm, we talked about this kind of state that the archives are in, and some of the books that you've written about, some of the films you've written books about, sorry, they don't have an archive necessarily. Like Planet of the Apes, for instance. I know myself, I worked with Fox for a short time, about a year or so, trying to come up with a making of about the original Planet of the Apes. And of course, because of the age of the film, there's not many people we can still talk to about it. There's information spread across the galaxy, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very different process, I imagine, for you. How did that go?
Well, that was a hard one because I had very little time to do it. So I just had to.
Right.
I just had to go in there like a whirling dervish. I mean, it was crazy because I had to be sort of writing, researching, interviewing, and really all at the same time, more than I think any other of the books that I've ever done. And that was a passion project. So I had pitched that one. I really loved that movie, Planet of the Apes. It had a big effect on me as a kid.
Okay.
So it was fortunate that basically the Arthur Jacobs archives is in, the LA area, Loyola.
Yeah.
So I spent a few days there, that was hugely important for the book. And then there was the Academy archives, and there was the Fox archives, and then there was Rod Serling archives, the Franklin Schaffner archives. So it was just a question of I was lucky. Sometimes you get lucky, and it's like, oh, we know where this is, and we just found this, and that kind of stuff was happening a little bit for the Planet of the Apes book.
Yeah. It's the one book of yours that I don't own and I haven't read, because my project got cancelled kind of unceremoniously. The plug was pulled on it about 2 days before we were going to go into kind of production on this documentary. So I'll get round to it at some point, but it's a bit of a sore point still. Yeah, still a bit raw. But no, I look forward to it, because all of those archives you mentioned, we ended up having our toes in each of those archives, and we'd found some people that were involved in the films originally, relations of people that were involved, fans, of course, and effects people that were inspired by it and everything else. I think, as well as your books giving us an insight into what happened at the time, I think it's always good to have a record of the film's legacy. And I guess in the Alien and Aliens book, you talk about that a little bit. Were those... I mean, with Alien, I found that obviously there's been very, very good documentaries about it over the years. Charles de Lauzarica has done some excellent work on those. I've talked to him in the past, and he feels that, he's kind of exhausted everything. How do you then approach something like Alien and know that there's going to be something fresh for you to get? Or do you just see it as, because it's a different medium, a book as opposed to a video, that something new will come out of it anyway?
What you just said is true to a fairly large degree. a video can do things that you can't do in a book, but a book can do things you can't do in a video. So, you can take longer to make a point in a book. You can digress a little bit more. It's just a different medium. I always hope that I'm going to find something else, but and I assume that if the studio is asking me to do a book about it, that there is something else. That's been the case every time except maybe once. So, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to come to, that's what was nice about episode 3. You're coming to a movie, you're the first person doing it. That makes it a lot easier in that sense. But it's funny how you can dig down, and when you start telling the story, you realize that other people who've sort of told the story just tell it in a different way. So, and I'm sure somebody could come to each of these movies and go through the same archives and probably tell the story in a different way and use slightly different pieces of information, because there's so much information you can't use it all. So you are picking and choosing.
And I guess I know from making my own projects that each time you release something else new comes to light, and you think, damn it, why wasn't that there when I was doing my project? But that's the reality of it. You release these things into the world, and they are what they are, and right. You move on, right?
Right.
What then led you to making the Star Wars comic? Was that after having done all of that research and seeing those kind of alternate paths George could have gone down with the story, and a kind of need to, explain that to people? Or was it purely like a commercial thing from them? They said, we need to do this, and you're the guy to do it.
No, it was more the former. I had read the script, and I thought, boy, nobody will ever make a movie out of this, but it just was obvious. This will make a great comic book. And then, as I wrote in the introduction to the comic book, I think it's in there. It's in it's a deluxe version or something. I'd worked on this other book with George about how Star Wars comic books, and George had said how much he loves visual storytelling when there's just either basically no story, no word balloons. And so I had asked him once about doing a comic book version, and he said no. He just said nope.
Direct answer.
And but then later I found out that Dark Horse had the same idea. Randy Stradley had read the rough draft, because anybody could read it, and had the same idea. This would make a great comic book. Because I had no budget for that at Lucasfilm, oddly enough, but Dark Horse did. So I said, well, if you can hire a comic book artist, I'll on my own dime write a script, but a wordless script of scenes that I think will appeal to George, and we'll send that over and see if he likes it. And so we did, and the artist did a great job, and George then suddenly approved it and got very excited about it. So then it was a go, but it was not to make money. It was just to do this sort of funky project. We were never saying that this is a lost masterpiece. We were saying, no, this is a known quantity, but now we're putting visuals to it for fun, because it's just so different from the final film.
That's the thing, isn't it? I think that's what people find so tantalizing about that idea that Star Wars, in a way, is like this perfect storm of all these things coming together, and at any moment it could have, veered off in some direction from its inception all the way up to its release into cinema. So I think that's always going to be interesting to people. Yeah. So, as with all of these books, thank you for making them. I mean, that was a bold move to go ahead and try and convince George after he'd given you a flat no. Is he someone, when you were working with him, was he someone that was open to suggestion?
Yeah, you really had to really be very careful about when and where you were suggesting anything. But I suggested a number of things, and I was talking to Howard Kazanjian, who, of course, did it a lot more than I did, because they were having lunch every day, and he was the actual producer. But you can suggest things, and George will maybe not say anything, but come back, later or sometimes the same day, and suddenly your suggestion is happening in whatever world that is.
Mm-hmm. And this book on Howard Kazanjian, then, what form is that taking? Is it a biography as such, or is it a coffee table type book, or what form is that going to be?
It's really just more of a memoir, this book. So it's not a coffee table book. It has a fair number of images in it from his collection, but it's really just, your sort of standard format, 6x9. Yeah. And I mean, the nice thing about it is it's not just one person droning on about their their life. Since I was writing it and interviewed him, I went out and interviewed probably a dozen other people, including Marsha Lucas and Bert and Sid Ganis and other Lucasfilm veterans. So it's kind of it's like a trip through the history of cinema from the 60s up until present day.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Because I tried to get him on the podcast, and he said, "No, I'm not doing any interviews until the book's out." And then obviously he's keen to do interviews, but it'd be interesting to speak to him because I've tried to contact him a number of times over the year, because I'm always interested in these unique perspectives of stories that are in the public domain. We think we know everything about a certain film, and then we get a different perspective. And I think there's great value in the work that you do. You've not only, of course, done these books about making of movies. You recently had a novel released, All Up. Can you talk to me about where that came from, how that came about, and what the story's about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, All Up was for me the ultimate passion project. It took about, I don't know, depending how you count it, 5 to 7 years. Not all the time writing, but more or less constant work on it for that period. And I just really wanted to write a book about the first space age, but not just the space race, which everybody's heard about the space race, but the space race or the space age really began before World War II and intensified during World War II, and then sort of blossomed during the space race. And a lot of the same people were involved in all three stages. And I wanted to tell their story, because I realized most people just didn't know anything about it. Again, including myself. I wasn't an expert when I would do it. And I spent years researching while I was writing it, and before and during. So anyway, I tried to write a real sort of thriller page turner about that period, and try to bring in stuff that you can't bring into a nonfiction book. I wanted to do it as a novel. What might have happened here or there, or, did so and so ever meet so and so, or etc.
Yeah, and because you're of an age where you would have seen the moon landing, right? Is that
right?
Correct? Yeah. So that
yeah.
I was born in 1976, so I missed that by some years. But I always think that any kid who witnessed that couldn't help but be inspired by it, and that must have been a big inspiration for you in everything you do.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're little, whatever. I think I was 69, so I was probably 6 years old, because it was your little 6-year-old brain just kind of goes bang, explodes, and then years later, your seeds are planted. Years later, that sprout. And, I went to the museum at Huntsville, which is this amazing museum in Alabama, and that kind of was the more recent catalyst. And then suddenly you're in this ridiculously long project, writing way too much.
And I've read it myself, and I really enjoyed it, I have to say. Being here in the UK, the space race was always very much an American-Russian thing. The Brits didn't have a huge involvement, but it was always something that I found very inspiring and very, opened up my imagination, let's say. And it's probably why I ended up loving the movies that we've already talked about. But has the feedback been good on the book?
Yeah. I think, from readers, and it's a small print run from Simon & Schuster and Permuted Press, but I'm hoping that we can get the word out, that people such as yourself will say, "Hey, have you read this?"
Yeah,
and because I do think it's a fun book and deserves some attention.
And I believe there's an audio book version of it out now.
Yeah, it just came out a few weeks or so ago. I'm hoping that word will slowly spread, and the publisher I know is planning to do some marketing to get the word out. But so far, I think that's what we're up against. That nobody out there really knows this book exists. So
Yeah,
anybody who can write a review or tweet about it is helpful.
yeah. Give it some traction. Well, part of the process in me doing this podcast is, you scratch my back by letting me interview you, and I scratch yours by posting about your work. So hopefully it's mutually beneficial. Were there any projects that you worked on that deviated kind of wildly from where you first imagined they would go? I mean, because obviously when you're writing about the making of story, adversity can be a good thing to write about, the difficulty in making something. And sometimes that story isn't there,
Yeah.
I would imagine. But has there been any examples where, the result has been completely different to what you initially imagined?
Well, sure. I mean, for the making of episode 3, I wasn't supposed to write the book, so
Oh.
somebody else was supposed to write the book,
Right.
and I didn't. I can't go into details, but one thing led to another, and so that ended up much differently from where I thought it would end up. And I resisted, and then because I thought I couldn't do it, and maybe I couldn't do it,
I think it's a great book.
but I did the best I could anyway.
Yeah, I guess that must have been quite a thing to be there on set with kind of history repeating itself with Darth Vader returning and all of that stuff. How kind of aware were you that this was a big kind of film culture moment?
Oh, everybody there was completely aware at that time. I mean, everybody was completely plugged into the situation and thinking at that time too that it was the last Star Wars movie and all that sort of thing. It was quite exciting, sometimes quite stressful, other times could be quite boring, and then quite exciting again. Every day sort of went through all of those stages. All of those moments.
And what was the reaction? What was your reaction when George ended up deciding to sell Lucasfilm to Disney? How did that go down in the Rinsler household?
Well, in the household, we were a little concerned about our future.
Yeah.
I think that was the basic gist of it. And then I think it depended which department you were in. But in Lucasfilm, but me personally, I was sad because I knew it was going to be the end. It was the end of an era, and but also I was excited. I thought, well, Disney is this huge company. I'm a big fan of Walt Disney and that sort of the Walt Disney era. I thought maybe there'd be some possibilities there. So I was, mixed feelings basically.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I've a lot of people have gone through difficulties with work recently, so I myself can empathise with that situation, having had my kind of livelihood disappear in a matter of moments thanks to coronavirus, as many millions have had, I'm sure.
I know how that feels as well. COVID has not been a friend to most people.
No. Is there anything about what you do that you think people don't understand?
Yes, there's one thing that definitely people don't understand, which is I get people asking me often, why don't you do this book or do about this film or this film or this film? And I don't get to choose.
Yeah, it's not your choice. Yeah.
Not my choice. Occasionally people have asked me to pitch projects, but most of the time you're a hired gun, and it's very hard. That's why you don't see too many people writing too many books. It's very hard to to have a passion project and bring it from your initial enthusiastic moment of wanting to do something to it actually being on a bookshelf is a long journey. It takes years for most people. And usually that's it. That's their one project. I've been lucky in that people come to me to do these other books, and they turn into interesting projects. I don't get to choose which one I get to do next. I can't just say, all right, and now I'm going to do Superman and wave my wand.
See, now that you said Superman, you're going to excite all of the listeners that are listening to this interview. I completely understand that you don't get the choice. But I guess given that you've got this, CV, this resume of all these books behind you, your ability kind of speaks for itself. So every time I hear that you're involved in a new project, I get excited because I know at least the quality that it's going to be. And, I've enjoyed all of your work, and I thank you for all of your books. And I thank you for giving your time today to speak to me. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Jonathan there. I'm sure you'll join me in sending love and best wishes, as well as any support we can offer him and his family in this very difficult time. I very much hope we can have the opportunity to chat again sometime in the future. For the next episode, I'll be chatting to Marty Brenis, a former employee of Industrial Light and Magic. He worked on many of the seminal films that we all know and love, including Raiders of the Lost Ark, Dragon Slayer, Poltergeist, E.T., Return of the Jedi, Cocoon, maybe not so seminal, Enemy Mine, and Back to the Future 2. I'm also hoping to speak to stuntman Ben Dimmock soon as well. He's just recovering from an operation, so hopefully that will be episode 13. Thanks for joining me. As always, if you can support me, please do check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Any contribution really, really does help, and it means a lot to me. So thank you for those that have stuck with me for all this time. I really do appreciate it. Couldn't do it without you. Hope you can join me next time for the Filmumentaries podcast.